Aaron Rodgers confronts a disrespectful fan. The truth behind their encounter leaves everyone stunned. Aaron Rodgers had dealt with criticism his entire career, but this time was different. It happened after a game, outside the stadium, where fans gathered to catch a glimpse of their favorite players. Rodgers was signing autographs, taking pictures, and greeting supporters when a voice cut through the noise. "Hey, Rodgers, you're overrated." The crowd went silent. People turned to see where the insult had come from. A young man, probably in his early 20s, stood with his arms crossed, a smug grin on his face. Rodgers paused, looking up from the football he was signing. He had heard worse before, but something about this moment made him stop. The fan laughed. "What? You don't like hearing the truth?" Rodgers handed the signed football to a kid beside him before stepping forward. "You got something you want to say to me?" The fan smirked. "Yeah, you're washed. You're not as good as you used to be. You should have retired years ago." A few people in the crowd gasped. Others pulled out their phones, sensing something was about to happen. Rodgers didn't flinch. He just studied the young man, his expression unreadable. Then, after a moment, he said something that no one expected. "Why do you really feel that way?" The fan blinked, caught off guard. "What?" Rodgers tilted his head. "I don't think this is just about football. So tell me, what's the real reason you're so angry?" The fan opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. And in that moment, the entire crowd realized this was about to be more than just an argument. The young man shifted uncomfortably under Rodgers' gaze. He had expected a quick reaction, maybe anger, maybe Rodgers walking away, but not this. "What do you mean?" the fan scoffed, crossing his arms. "I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking." Rodgers nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "All right. Then tell me, why does it bother you so much?" The fan rolled his eyes. "It doesn't bother me. I'm just tired of people acting like you're still the best. You're not. You're old. You've lost a step. And the team is worse because of you." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some fans shifted awkwardly, while others looked at Rodgers, waiting for his response. Rodgers took a deep breath. "And that makes you mad?" The fan hesitated. "Yeah, I guess." Rodgers nodded again, his voice calm. "Mad enough to come out here, wait for me, and yell it in front of all these people?" The fan clenched his jaw. He hadn't thought about it like that. Rodgers stepped closer, his tone still measured. "You're passionate about this team. I get it, but let's be real, you're not angry because of football." The fan scoffed. "Yeah? Then why am I angry?" Rodgers studied him for a moment, then said something that made the entire crowd go silent. "Because you feel like you're losing too." The fan blinked. "What?" Rodgers crossed his arms. "People who are happy don't go out of their way to tear others down. You didn't come here just to talk about football. You came here because something in your life isn't going the way you want, and it's easier to take it out on me than to deal with it." The fan swallowed hard. His face was turning red not with anger, but with something else. Rodgers continued. "I've seen this before. Guys who scream at players online. Guys who call in to sports radio and rant for hours. It's not just about the game. It's personal. So tell me what's really going on?" For the first time, the fan had nothing to say. The crowd watched in stunned silence. No one had expected this. Finally, after what felt like forever, the fan let out a sharp breath. "You don't know anything about me?" Rodgers shrugged. "Maybe not. But I know what it's like to feel like the world is against you. Like, no matter what you do, it's never enough." The fan's posture stiffened. His smirk was gone. Rodgers lowered his voice. "So tell me what's really going on." The fan glanced around. People were still watching. Cameras were recorded. He looked like he wanted to run, but something in Rodgers' tone made him stop. Then, finally, he spoke. "My dad." He hesitated, his voice unsteady. "My dad and I used to watch your games together. He was your biggest fan. He passed away last year." The crowd fell completely silent. Rodgers' expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that." The fan swallowed hard. "He loved you, always defended you, Always told me you were one of the greats, and now that he's gone, I just. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. I don't know. It's stupid. Rodgers nodded, letting the moment settle. It's not stupid. The fan looked down, kicking at the pavement. I guess I just hated watching you struggle this season. It felt like, I don't know, like something was slipping away. Like another piece of him was gone. Rodgers nodded again. I get that. The fan looked up, surprised. You do? Rodgers signed. Yeah. When I was younger, my dad and I didn't always see eye to eye. But he was the one who got me into football. And when he passed, there were games I didn't even want to play in, because it felt wrong without him watching. The fan didn't say anything, but his jaw tightened. Rodgers continued, You're not mad at me. You're mad at the fact that life keeps moving forward, even when you're not ready for it. The fan clenched his fists, his breathing shaky. Rodgers gave him a small, understanding nod. You don't have to like me. You don't have to be my fan. But don't let your anger at me be the thing that keeps you from dealing with what you're really feeling. The fan exhaled sharply, his shoulders dropping. His entire body language had changed. I just miss him, he whispered. Rodgers placed a hand on his shoulder. I know, and that's okay. The fan wiped at his eyes quickly, like he didn't want anyone to see. Rodgers pulled a Sharpie from his pocket and held out his hand. Give me your hat. The fan hesitated before taking off his cap and handing it to Rodgers. Rodgers signed it, then looked at him. That one's for your dad. The fan stared at the signature, then nodded slowly. Thanks. Rodgers gave him a pat on the back. Take care, man. As Rodgers turned back to the crowd, the fan stood there, still holding the signed cap, his expression unreadable. But as he walked away, one thing was clear: he wasn't leaving as the same person who had arrived. The fan stood frozen, staring at the autograph on his cap. His emotions were tangled anger, regret, sadness, but most of all, relief. Rodgers had done something no one else had. He hadn't fought back. He hadn't embarrassed him. He had listened. Rodgers turned back to the rest of the crowd, signing a few more autographs. But he could feel the shift in the air. The energy wasn't the same. What had started as a confrontation had turned into something entirely different. As Rodgers finished with the last fan, he glanced back at the young man who was still standing there, gripping his hat. Their eyes met for a brief second. The fan gave a small nod, not of victory, not of defeat, but of understanding. Rodgers returned the nod before walking toward the stadium exit. As the crowd slowly dispersed, a few people approached the fan. Man, one of them said, I don't think any of us expected that. The fan let out a breath. Yeah, me neither. He looked down at the signature again, running his fingers over the ink. He had come here with anger, but he was leaving with something else entirely. Rodgers hadn't just changed his mind about football. He had changed his perspective on life. The fan walked away from the crowd, his mind still racing. He had spent the past year angry at everything at life, at football, at the way things had changed after his dad passed, and today he had aimed that anger at Aaron Rodgers. But Rodgers hadn't fought back. He hadn't mocked him or dismissed him. Instead, he had done something the fan never expected he had understood. He looked down at his cap again, at the signature that wasn't just a name, it was a reminder. A reminder that his dad had loved this game, and no amount of frustration or grief could take that away. His phone buzzed. A text from his older brother. Saw the video. You okay? He sighed. Of course, someone had recorded it. He opened Twitter, and sure enough, the clip was already spreading. But instead of people bashing him, the comments were different. Rodgers just handled that with pure class. That fan thought he was gonna own Rodgers, and instead, Rodgers gave him therapy. Sometimes people don't need to be yelled at. They just need someone to listen. He swallowed hard. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel angry. Instead, he felt something else, a little more at peace. The fan sat on a bench outside the stadium, still scrolling through the comments. He had expected people to tear him apart, call him disrespectful, make fun of him. But instead, they were talking about Rodgers, how he had handled the situation, how he hadn't reacted with anger, but with understanding. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. He had come to that stadium ready to unload his frustrations, ready to take out all the emotions he hadn't processed since losing his dad. And instead, Rodgers had given him perspective. His phone buzzed again. Another text from his brother. "Call me when you can." He hesitated, then sighed and dialed the number. His brother answered almost immediately. "Dude, I saw what happened." The fan let out a weak chuckle. "Yeah, I wasn't exactly planning on going viral." His brother was quiet for a second. "Listen, man, I know you've been struggling. I know Dad's death hit you hard. But what Rodgers said back there, he was right." The fan clenched his jaw, staring at the ground. "I know!" His brother took a deep breath. "You don't have to deal with this alone." For the first time in a long time, he believed that. And for the first time since his dad passed, he wanted to start healing. The fan sat in silence, gripping his phone tightly. His brother's words echoed in his mind. "You don't have to deal with this alone." For the past year, he had convinced himself that no one understood what he was going through, that no one cared. So he buried his emotions, let them turn into anger, and used football as his outlet. But Rodgers had seen right through him. He exhaled sharply. "I didn't mean for it to get like this. I don't know how to handle it." His brother sighed on the other end. "You think Dad would have wanted you to be this angry?" The question hit hard. He had been so caught up in his frustration that he hadn't thought about what his dad would actually say if he were here. "No," he admitted quietly. "Then let's change that," his brother said. "We don't have to forget him, but we do have to keep living." The fan nodded to himself, wiping his eyes. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was drowning in grief. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to let go of the anger. And oddly enough, it had taken Aaron Rodgers to make him realize that. The fan leaned back on the bench, staring up at the sky. His mind was still racing, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't just angry, he was thinking.
His brother's words stuck with him. "We don't have to forget Dad, but we do have to keep living." For so long, he had associated football with his father. It had been their thing, watching games together, arguing over plays, celebrating wins, complaining about losses. And when his dad passed, it felt like all of it had been ripped away. He had thought that his anger at Rodgers, at the team, at everything, was about football. But now, he saw the truth. It wasn't about the game. It was about missing his father and not knowing how to deal with that loss. His phone buzzed again. Another notification. Another comment on the video. This wasn't about football. Rodgers saw the pain behind that guy's words. Respect to him for handling it the way he did. The fan exhaled. He had been expecting hate, but instead, people were understanding. Just like Rodgers had. He tapped his phone, hesitating for a second before opening his text thread with his brother. "Hey, you want to watch the next game together?" The response came almost immediately. "Of course, man. Let's do it." For the first time in over a year, the idea of watching football didn't feel painful. It felt like reconnecting. Maybe he hadn't lost that part of his dad after all. Maybe he had just been too hurt to see it. And somehow, the person who made him realize that was the same man he had disrespected just hours ago. The fan took a deep breath, staring at his phone. His brother's response sat on the screen of course, man. Let's do it. For the first time in a long time, he felt lighter. His anger had never been about Aaron Rodgers. It had never been about football. It had been about grief, about loss, about feeling like he was losing his connection to his father. But that connection hadn't disappeared. It had just been buried under pain. And now, thanks to one unexpected conversation, he was finally starting to see things differently. The next Sunday, he sat down with his brother, just like they used to with their dad. The game came on, and there was Aaron Rodgers, stepping onto the field. The fan smirked. "All right, let's see if he's really washed up." His brother chuckled. "Don't backtrack now. You met the guy. He put you in your place." The fan laughed. Yeah, he did." Rodgers took the first snap, scanning the field. He stepped up, fired a perfect pass, and hit his receiver in stride. The fan nodded. Still got it. He didn't realize it, but for the first time since his father's passing, he wasn't watching the game with bitterness. He was just enjoying it. This story isn't just about football, it's about how pain can sometimes disguise itself as anger. We all go through struggles, and sometimes we take it out on the wrong things or the wrong people. But like Aaron Rodgers showed, a little understanding can go a long way. So ask yourself who in your life might be hurting underneath their anger. Who needs someone to listen instead of just reacting? Because sometimes the biggest impact doesn't come from winning an argument. It comes from showing understanding when it matters most.